Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a fascinating and, let's be real, kind of painful reality. We're going to look at exactly why giving 100% in our relationships can actually tear them apart. If you've ever felt totally exhausted from constantly doing things for others, only to feel completely underappreciated, well, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this.
Right off the bat, let's look at this profound thought from our source material. The satisfied eventually forget the hand that gives. It sounds super tragic, right? But it hits the nail on the head regarding a deep psychological truth about human nature and how our brains process continuous generosity.
You know the feeling, right? Have you ever noticed that your well-intentioned efforts to give more, whether that's putting in extra hours at work, taking on literally all the chores at home, or constantly bending over backward in a romance, eventually just lead to resentment instead of gratitude? You're doing everything right, but somehow the whole thing is going wrong. So why on earth does giving your all actually ruin relationships?
That brings us to Section 1, the trap of overgiving. Let's see how this breakdown actually builds over time. It's really like a domino effect, and it starts out beautifully with pure intentions. You just want to help. But quickly we hit step 2, where doing those chores or providing all that emotional support just becomes the new normal. By step 3, gratitude totally vanishes because, well, it's just expected now. And finally, step 4, resentment builds. What started as this incredibly kind act slowly devolves into a quiet, relationship-ending frustration on both sides.
Section 2. The psychology of adaptation. Let's look at the underlying science of why this happens.
Okay, so there's this psychological concept called adaptation. When you continuously give to someone, their brain naturally registers that constant reward as the baseline. It's no longer special, it's just the basic expectation. So the absolutely crucial point here is that by continually giving, you are actually raising the other person's baseline. You're basically guaranteeing they will feel dissatisfied the moment you do even slightly less. You are essentially programming them to want more.
The source brilliantly illustrates this with a home remodeling metaphor. Think about it. If you hire a contractor to do absolutely everything, suddenly you become the ultimate perfectionist, walking around pointing out tiny flaws. Fix this, change that. It leads to endless demands. But if you do it yourself, smash thumbs and all, you find immense satisfaction through your own effort. When we do everything for someone, we turn them into a complaining client. But when they do it themselves, they find actual fulfillment.
All right, moving to Section 3, the 70% rule. This is the counterintuitive paradigm shift that's a real game changer.
Imagine your effort is capped at exactly 70%. Now, what's really interesting here is that leaving that 30% left over isn't an act of coldness. Actually, scratch that. It's not mean at all. It is an intentional creation of blank space that fosters the other person's ability to act for themselves.
So, why does this 30% blank space matter? Well, because it sparks initiative to fill the gap. It fosters true independence instead of a toxic dependency. And crucially, it totally prevents burnout and exhaustion for you, the giver. Think about your own workplace for a second. When an overly helpful manager finally stops doing absolutely everything for their team, it leaves a gap. And that gap forces the team to start thinking and acting for themselves again.
Section 4, Saviors and Victims. Let's explore the psychological traps we fall into when we don't leave that blank space.
This side-by-side comparison really reveals the dark side of good intentions. On one hand, we have the savior, standing tall but secretly relying on the other person's weakness for their own self-worth, which breeds this quiet arrogance. On the other hand, the victim. Once they're finally healed up, they often develop this wild entitlement, thinking, I have suffered, so you owe me. Both of these mindsets are incredibly destructive to an equal partnership.
It's crazy, but that beautiful desire to rescue someone can unconsciously morph into the arrogant desire to control them. It is a harsh reality that when the victim finally recovers and stands up on their own 2 feet, the savior often feels a bizarre sense of loss, or even unfairness. And why is that? Because their tool for self-satisfaction, the person they were saving, is suddenly gone.
When roles get this blurry, it gets dangerous. Roles become fluid, but the expectations remain rigid. Look, when we simply assume that chores, time, or emotional support will always be given, whether by a spouse or a coworker, we are quietly signing the death warrant of that relationship. Being given to mutates into being entitled to. And when the power inevitably reverses, both sides are left feeling deeply, deeply wronged.
Section 5, Forgiveness as the exit. So, how do we actually escape this toxic cycle?
Simply put,
Forcing change builds defensive walls, but providing context for natural choice builds bridges. Instead of aggressively forcing the other person to appreciate you or demanding they change their ways, you must carefully curate that 30% blank space we talked about. Give them the context and the room so they can naturally step up and make the right choice, all without losing their dignity.
And here is the absolute key to breaking the chain. You have to choose the internal feeling of already being repaid over the endless demand for compensation. The source highlights that true relational balance requires a profound act of mercy. It means internally forgiving the debts of the past rather than demanding a tit-for-tat repayment for your suffering. You don't ignore reality, but you actively choose not to let it drag you into this endless cycle of resentment.
So the real takeaway here is this. Your struggles, the times you gave way too much and felt unappreciated, they actually give you a beautifully deep perspective on life. Hardship creates genuine character and a high-resolution understanding of others' struggles. But the second you use that past pain as a weapon to claim superiority or demand payback, you completely lose that depth. True freedom comes from holding your suffering quietly and moving forward.
I want to leave you with this final thought to apply directly to your own life. Starting today, where will you create blank space in your relationships? Step back from the 100%. Respect their autonomy, give them that 30% of room to grow, and just watch how that simple, intentional space transforms your connections. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you build healthier, more balanced relationships.